The honourable member Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A lot to say on this bill. Maybe I'll just start with a brief personal anecdote, and I want to be very clear when I say this. I don't do this as victim porn or looking for sympathy. It's more of an example of if somebody like myself in a position of privilege has a hard time accessing the justice system, what about others? Very briefly, when I was a Minister of the Crown over 10 years ago now, I received very explicit sexualized online threats, very graphic descriptions of how somebody was going to rape me, with what instruments, how they were going to kill me. I was alone in a hotel room. My schedule was published the day before, and I was terrified. The response at that time from law enforcement and the process that I had to go through as a Minister of the Crown to attempt to get justice in a situation that didn't involve intimate images, but it sticks with me to this day. And if I had to go through that at that time, what hope is there for somebody who didn't have my position of privilege? And what this bill does is recognize that the forms of harassment that, as my colleague from Esquimalt Saanich says, disproportionately impacts women, sexual minorities, and other persons, that discrimination, that harassment has not, it has outpaced Parliament's ability to change the law. And here we are today. Briefly, I want to respond to some of the points of debate. First of all, my colleague from the Liberals who suggested that we expedite Bill C-63, this bill has been so widely panned by such a variety of disparate stakeholders that the government actually hasn't even scheduled it for debate in the House yet. So I'll start with that. Second of all, Bill C-63, and this is particularly for my colleagues that are looking to support this this bill through to second reading. It does not provide criminal provisions for any of the activities that are either in this bill or in some of the other instances that have been brought up in the House for debate tonight, particularly the distribution, the non-consensual distribution of deep nudes and deep fake pornography. I raised this issue, Madam Speaker, in the House over 7 months ago, that the intimate image distribution laws that are currently in the criminal code, that were only put in place in 2014, about a decade after social media came into play and after Rehtaeh Parsons and Amanda Todd tragically died due to an absence in the law. 7 months have passed, and the government could have dealt with updating the criminal code with a very narrow provision that the Canadian Bar Association has asked for, multiple victims' rights groups have asked for, and yet they've chosen not to. What they've done with C-63, there are so many articles that have been written about what is wrong with what's in C-63 that we now need to start paying attention to what's wrong with C-63 because of what's not in there. And there is no update to Canada's criminal code provision on the distribution of intimate images that are produced by artificial intelligence that are known as deep nudes. And Madam Speaker, I want to be very clear about this. There are websites right now where you or anyone in this place can go and download an app to your phone, upload any image of any person, including any person in here. Imagine what that looks like during an election campaign. Erase people's clothes, put it on, and make it look like legitimate pornography. And imagine then that just being distributed on social media without consent. And our criminal code, the Canadian Bar Association, law professors, I could read case after case after case, say that our laws do not update that. At the beginning of February, there was a Canadian Press article that said that the government would update this law in their Bill C-63, and they didn't. Instead, what they chose to do was put in place a three-headed bureaucracy, an entirely extrajudicial process that amounts to a victim of these crimes being told to go to a bureaucratic complaints department instead of being able to get restitution under the law. And you know what that says to a perpetrator? It says, go ahead, do it. There's no justice for you. it boggles my mind that the government has spent all of this time, while countless women, countless vulnerable Canadians are being harassed right now. I also want to highlight something that my colleague from Esquimalt-Saanich said, which is the lack of resources for law enforcement across the country. Well, everybody had a nice couple of years talking about defund the police. How many thousands of women across this country, tens of thousands, maybe even millions, experienced online harassment and were told when they finally got the courage to go to the police, they were told, you know what, it's in your head, right? One of those women was killed in Calgary recently. One of those women is Mercedes Stevenson, who talked about her story about trying to get justice for online harassment. And if women like Mercedes Stevenson and myself have a hard time getting justice, how is a teenager in Winnipeg at a high school supposed to get any sort of justice without clarity in the criminal code if she has deep nudes spread about her? I'll tell you how it goes, because it happened. It happened after I raised this in the House of Commons. A high school in Winnipeg, I said it was going to happen, and it happened. These kids are posting artificial intelligence generated deep nudes and deep fakes, and they're harassing peers, they're harassing young women, and you know what happened? No charges were laid. And why were no charges laid? According to the article, because of ambiguity in the criminal code around artificial intelligence created deep nudes. Imagine that. 7 months have passed. It's not in C-63, and at least this bill is looking at both sides of the coin on the criminal code provisions that we need to start looking at. I want to ensure that this government is immediately updating the criminal code to say that if it is illegal to distribute images of a person, intimate images of a person that have been taken with a camera, it should be the exact same thing if it's been generated by a deep nude artificial intelligence. Like, that this should have been done a long time ago. Peter Menzies, a former head of the CRTC, before C-63 came out, he talked about the need for this to have nonpartisan consensus and have narrowly scoped bills so that it could pass the House, right? But what the government has chosen to do with C-63 is put in place a broad regulatory system with nebulous, even more nebulousness on criminal code provisions that will actually, there's been a lot of people who have raised concerns about what that regulatory system will do and whether or not it's actually going to be able to address these things. And the government hasn't even allowed the House to debate that yet. What we have in front of us, from my perspective, is a clear call to action to update the criminal code where we can in narrow provisions so that law enforcement have the tools that they need to ensure that victims of these types of crimes can receive justice. What is happening is technology is rapidly outpacing our ability to keep up with the law, and women are dying. That's what's happening here. So, again, I do not understand. First of all, I'll say I'm very pleased to hear the multi-partisan nature of debate on these types of issues, that there's at least a willingness to bring forward these types of initiatives to committee, to have these discussions. But it does concern me that the government has eschewed any sort of update of the criminal code on a like versus like basis for regulators, where essentially, again, what I'm worried about is that they're telling victims to go to the complaints department and extrajudicial process as opposed to giving law enforcement the tools that they need. So I'm sure that there will be much more debate on this, Madam Speaker, but at the end of the day, 7 months have passed since I have asked the government to update the criminal code to ensure that deep nudes and deep fakes are in the criminal code, that on the non-consensual intimate image distribution laws. And certainly, Madam Speaker, what we're talking about here is ensuring that law enforcement have every tool that they need to ensure that women and other, as some of my colleagues have raised here, sexual minorities are not victimized online through these types of technologies. Thank you.